finding possibility in what might seem impossible. I studied at Reading University between 1984 and 1988, and then about 6 months afterwards I went to Mexico City, with a group of English art students. Really, none of us were artists, so we were all coming out of art college from Winchester and Reading, with the idea of being outside of Europe for a few months at least, to do a kind of self-initiated residency. We all liked it so much that we all stayed longer periods of time. And then I stayed for a much longer period of time, 24, 25 years now. I think it was a very interesting moment there, beginning of the 90s. There were several artists that had been away, for studying away outside Mexico, who were coming back. And then there were several foreign artists who were also living there, or just starting to kind of root themselves there. I had a very small cafe called Mel's Cafe, which I started with Francis Elise the beginning of the 90s. And that also was some kind of meeting point or informal meeting point for younger artists and foreigners and locals all at the same time. It was my studio, which I converted into this kind of clandestine cafe for just Sundays, you know. We used to show a lot in our different studios. It was kind of improvised. But I think this was also what caused some kind of freshness. You know, there was really no market there at the time. I think there was this sort of urgency or sensation that something had to be said, and also something had to be generated. So there was this real kind of very genuine, I think, energy, which may be hard to find now. You know, Mexico itself is very Baroque, very different from, I guess, the formation that I'd had as an artist, where I was really interested in minimalism. So really going to Mexico gave me this 180-degree shift in my interests and work, you know, going to this completely different, excessive, saturated culture was attractive and at the same time repellent, and I think that comes across a lot in early works, like Orange Lush, for example. Something that I'm interested in is where is that kind of meeting point, or is there a meeting point between minimalism and surrealism, or is that possible? In Mexico, there are many surreal events in everyday life. Somehow, you know, you always, part of you is always from where you come from, even if you live somewhere else. There's always this kind of duality about where you are from and where you are living, and that sensation within you. I think from my experience of talking with other people as well, is it doesn't ever really go. You just learn to deal with it. You're always kind of on the edge, you know, somehow. And I think that's, you know, Mexico City is a very raw place to live. You know? Can these move from here or not now? So there's always this sort of notion that progress in Latin America has seemed impossible, through corruption, through political, social problematics that arise. And that is what makes it somehow, in many eyes, has been seen as a failed modernity. But what my work introduces somehow is that these are not failures. This kind of precariousness of life is part of life. This somehow, perhaps even non-rational, non-functional way of understanding the world is something which opens up some kind of possibility. I think my work is kind of uncovering and finding some kind of potential in all those messed up kind of situations. In Mexico, I kind of learned that this very kind of formal abstract work, which I had been doing as a student, just didn't really seem to function there, because you cannot avoid this kind of crude reality of the political situation, the social situation, the many very kind of raw experiences that you have in the city. A city filled with poverty, a city filled with pollution, a city filled with many political problems. For me, my question was, what sense does it make to just be making formal abstract work? It didn't. So I was always constantly looking for these kind of mechanisms behind, a kind of duality between this kind of, I think what some of our artists have we've come to call it kind of corrupted minimalism now, where there's this trying to unleverage, uncover what is behind the surface somehow. How do we see things from, or the world from, as an artist or a subject from both sides? And I think this is how, in a way, my work has developed of understanding modernity, not in this terms of the black and white about us and them, and I think we all know that doesn't somehow work anymore. So my work has been, I think it's about understanding somehow these complexities or idiosyncrasies of both places. In Hilitla, what I was trying to do was set up a kind of constellation of ideas which have historical and not historical levels. But I was also trying to understand or look at what Hilitla could mean to us as a contemporary site now. And what could we learn, in a sense, from that building a non-functional, non-rational, kind of emotional architecture? How could we see that again as some kind of alternative to this functionalist, rationalist systems in which we live in? I was taking Edward James's garden as a premise for the film. This reason why James would build a ruin, almost. Why would he build a place that was for himself, essentially, that was he was building it with the idea of the nature falling into or collapsing the structures. And why would he go all the way over to 10 hours out of Mexico City to build this homage to himself, in a sense? There was a lot of Robert Smithson in the film, there's Dan Flavin, there's surrealism, there's huge tension between sound and image. So that there's this, it's almost like it's constantly throwing the viewer, in my mind, into a sort of present state where as soon as you think you've understood something, you're kind of led into another narrative and then woven back into the same one. And so it's this sort of spiral again of ideas that don't have a linear narrative.
Para coordenação em Fordlândia, nas coordenadas 05 graus e 50 minutos sul.
Fordlandia is more about sort of finding a horizontality between the animal world, the machine, and the human world. That was why I was really focusing on these small twitches and eyes or noses or breathing of an animal. Henry Ford, who made this place Fordlandia during the 1920s as a rubber factory, he bought an American workforce, he bought an American housing, he bought American machinery down there, put millions of dollars into this project, but mostly due to the resistance of nature, he found that he just couldn't make this project work. He basically created this dystopian project, and so my interest there was like I said, trying to put on a sort of horizontal level the way in which animal, machine, humans function in this sort of same ontological level. How could we think of the animal as some kind of potential, in a way, for thinking in the present? Animals are so locked up in their presentness. And this was a project that was so much about progress, so much about industrial development, and so much about future. How could we, as humans, be contented in our own presentness?